Well, the Super Bowl is in the rearview mirror, which means it's time for spring training, and I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant in Surprise, Arizona, where the Rangers held their first workout with pitchers and catchers on Tuesday. Skip Schumacher's first real day on the job with his team. And welcome in to the Rangers SportsDay Rangers podcast.
So, Evan, spring training, I'm sure you would have liked to have stayed home through Valentine's Day. It would have been a big milestone, but it has to start early this year because we've got the World Baseball Classic comes up, which game's starting in early March, and the season opens on the 26th for the Rangers in Philadelphia, so it's an early spring start.
Yeah, I think this is the earliest opening date in Rangers history, if I'm not mistaken, John. But be that as it may, we're here, and we'll be here for spring training. Myself and Sean McFarland will have the Rangers covered. Our columnists will come out to fire up some hot sports opinions. And this week on the podcast, we're going to be joined by former Rangers General Manager Doug Melvin, who was with the club for nearly a decade from 1994 through 2001. We'll talk to him about the decisions the GM makes in spring training, the 30th anniversary of the Rangers' first division title, and we'll swap a few stories because Doug loves to swap stories.
Yes, log stories, and he enjoys that. And on the archives this week, we're going to start a little spring training memories, and where better to start than Pompano Beach, Florida, where the Rangers trained, the franchise trained there from 1961 through 1986. And while spring training complexes back in the 70s and 80s weren't real Taj Mahals anywhere, Pompano Beach was a step below everything else.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So Evan, what is, speaking of spring training, what have been the first few days in Surprise like for you and the team?
Well, I think it's been what the Rangers expected. You know, there's been positive energy here. Not that there wasn't positive energy at the beginning of last spring. I think it's always going to be positive energy at the start of spring. If it's not, you've got a real issue. Well, I was real interested in the first workout just to kind of follow Skip Schumacher around. And quite frankly, John, I lost him a couple of times because he takes a very unimposing stance, particularly when it comes to watching pitchers throw their bullpens. He was out in the outfield yesterday shagging during catcher's BP. He crouched down, right against the screen to watch the pitchers. For me, the most significant thing that happened is, look, this is his first day on the job, and you know as well as I, right? Pitchers and catchers report 5 days later, full team reports. Usually the manager addresses the pitchers and catchers. 5 days later, he pretty much goes over the same thing again for the whole team. Skip didn't do that. When it came time to address the pitchers and catchers, Jordan Teese, the new pitching coach, ran the whole meeting. Skip didn't say a word. And when I asked him about that afterwards, he said, listen, I want my coaches to coach. I want their voices to be heard. And what better way for that to happen than for them to take a really strong presence on the first workout? So I was impressed by that thought process there, and that he is really trying to empower these coaches. And I think it's also, noteworthy that the Rangers are going to have one of the youngest coaching staffs in terms of calendar years in the big leagues this year.
I thought it was interesting, and you wrote about this a couple of days ago, where Skip said, I want players, I don't want it to always be a situation where myself or one of our coaches is going to a player. We're trying to create an environment, both in spring training that will carry over to the regular season, where a player will come to us. Well, players will come to us, and they'll feel comfortable coming to coaches. I think that's a really great way to look at it, and a good way to get started.
Yeah, I really was impressed with the things he said yesterday First of all, and you've been through this with any number of managers, right? A new manager comes in and you're hearing the same things in a different voice or with different words, and it sounds a little bit different. But I heard some things that, I hadn't heard before. And one thing that Skip mentioned yesterday was, I think this spring, the first steps is going to be going to players and giving them positive feedback and positive encouragement. And when needs to be direct, be direct. But he kind of remembered this story of what it was like as the last player competing for a spot on the roster in St. Louis. And he'd come into spring training the morning of the workout, and the hitting coach, who was Mark McGuire at the time, or the fielding coach was Jose Oquendo, would grab him immediately and say, "Hey, I got something for you. I found something in your swing," or I want you to work on this drill today. And he was like, that really made me feel like this guy cared about me, that this guy had spent time putting effort and thought into a way to make me better. And I'm the last guy on the roster. And he expressed that to his coaches. He wants them, many of whom, Rod Barajas, Travis Jankowski, Dave Bush, all played in the big leagues.
Big leagues.
He wants them to remember that when they're talking with players. Go up to a player and give him something early in the morning that's encouraging, and it will make him understand that, hey, you're as invested in him as he should be invested in the team.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some specific players. The Rangers earlier this week signed a familiar face in Jordan Montgomery, who is not going to be ready probably, till mid-season. But again, in a situation where you're always looking for starting pitching depth, seemed like a pretty good move for Chris Young.
It's a low-risk move. The deal is still pending a physical as we report this. But he had Tommy John surgery last March. Keith Meister, the Rangers team physician, did the surgery and is overseeing his rehab. So the club feels very comfortable with that. And that's one place where Dr. Meister makes a big difference for the Rangers. And secondly, look, I think there's something to be said. It's hard to express this, but you've got to have a lot of pitching depth, and you can't just count on your farm system providing that pitching depth over the season. And so I think it almost behooves every team to sign a guy that you won't have to put on the opening day roster, whether he's recovering from an injury or he's a straight minor league signing, whatever, that he will be there at some point in time and still in reserve to help your team. And that's, I think, the way the Rangers look at Jordan Montgomery. And the way I wrote the story when the deal was done was, look, they went out and got him for the second half in 2023, and effectively that's what they're doing all over again, getting him for the second half. So for $1.2 million in guaranteed money, I think it's a real smart move on the Rangers' part. I also don't think that this prohibits them from making some other moves if there's the opportunity to before spring training concludes. But yeah, there's a little bit of risk involved with that he won't pitch, but for $1.2 million, it's very much worth it.
So the Rangers, I guess, have not counting Montgomery, have 37 pitchers in big league camp, and that includes Cody Bradford, I think, too. And now today they've gone off the mound. They've all thrown bullpens here early on. What's your impression? Who are your sleepers? What are you thinking here early on? And I know it's very early on in camp, but now you've seen all these guys throw at least once off a mound. What are your early impressions?
Well, I look at the idea that there are two things, right? One is you just want to make sure that your big dogs are healthy, that Jacob deGrom and Nathan Eovaldi get through spring healthy. Eovaldi threw on the first day, had no issues, seems to be absolutely fine. The other thing that I look for is pitchers who can make an impression, right? Who may not have had much role the previous year, but have a chance to really take steps this season. And I wrote a column at the beginning of the week on my 5 guys who I thought could make the most impression. 2 of them are fairly obvious because Kumar Rocker and Jacob Latz both have an opportunity to win spots in the rotation. Jacob would potentially pitch as a high leverage guy in the bullpen if Kumar wins that roster spot. The other is the Rule 5 pick, Carter Baumler. That's a guy, obviously, who the Rangers would like to keep, but he's got to pitch well enough in spring training to keep him. And you know the deal with Rule 5 picks. If you don't keep them on your roster, you've got to offer them back to the other club. So
if you expect to contend, it's hard to keep a Rule 5 guy unless he can really contribute.
100%. But there were two guys that I thought would be very interesting, and they're the Rangers lack a high velocity guy at the back of the bullpen, and there are two guys in camp who could provide that. Mark Church is going to be, who has a little dab of major league experience, is going to be behind a little bit because he's still dealing with a slow buildup from the lat muscle issue that he had for much of last year. But what was interesting was on the first day of workouts on Tuesday, Gavin Collier, a reliever also from Atlanta, like Mark Church, was in one of the first groups to throw. And when we talked to Skip Schumacher before the day, when we asked him, who are you excited to see? He rolled off some names. The first name he rolled off was Gavin Collier.
Wow.
And then this morning, or this is where we're recording this on Wednesday, when we talked to Skip about the first day of workouts, I said, did Collier open eyes? And he said, yeah, they were opened. And he went on to really extol what the guy has. He was also a realist enough to know that, look, when there's nobody standing in the box and there's no swings and there's no crowd, it's one thing. It's all about stuff. It's all about arm angle and things that you see that can be deceptive. But he also understands that with Collier, and this applied to Mark Church as well, the walk rates last year were not acceptable in the big leagues. So if Collier can dial up his 95 to 99 mile an hour fastball, and he was 96 in the pen on the first day of camp, if he can dial that up all spring and attack the strike zone, there's real opportunity for him to make an impact on the opening day roster and maybe even in a higher leverage role as the season goes on.
And that's going to be important. Obviously, a non-roster guy like Collier is, it's a little tougher roster maneuvering, but if a guy and the Rangers have had guys like that come through before. You mentioned Church. You remember Church opened eyes last spring and everything, then got hurt and never really panned out. The other guy that opened eyes last spring was Patrick Murphy, who's back in camp again after a sojourn to Korea and Japan. So, with all the games and all the innings available, and that's obviously the tough thing. You've got to balance that on trying to get innings for all these guys. And the Rangers do have openings, like we said. There is some flexibility for new guys to come through for the bullpen.
There are a number of jobs open, a number of spots open in the bullpen, and a number of roles still to be decided. And so I think it will be a competitive look in the bullpen. The Rangers signed Alexis Diaz, the brother of Edwin Diaz. And Alexis has lots of closing experience. I think he had three seasons with 25 saves or more. His velocity had been down the last 2 years, and his mechanics had been off. But even though they signed him to a major league contract, he's got options remaining. So it's not like he's got a guaranteed spot. My point in all of this is there really aren't a whole lot of guaranteed spots in that bullpen. There is opportunity for guys to step forward. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast to you before, John, but last year, one of the reasons that bullpen ended up overachieving was that a guy who nobody really expected, Cole Winn, took a step in the minor leagues that allowed him an opportunity in the big leagues, and he really seized it. And the Rangers need somebody else like that who is not going to be on the big league roster or not on the big league horizon at this very moment to be in a position to impact the team for the significant portion of the season.
Last thing on the team, because we'll be talking about this all spring with position players, but the impact of the World Baseball Classic. Rangers didn't have a lot of impact in 2023. Jose Leclerc was supposed to go pitch for a Dominican Republic team that personally I know very disappointing. But this year you've got Robert Garcia, chance to have a real role with leverage in the back end of the bullpen, and Alejandro Osuna, outfielder. Both are going to be gone for at least a part of camp. Those are two of the most significant ones. How do the Rangers look at that early?
Well, I think that this is great for Alejandro Osuna and for Robert Garcia. Robert is very, very much wants to have a high leverage role in the bullpen. He's going to be on a Mexican team that has Andres Munoz in the closer's role. And we can try and rank closers all we want, but Andres Munoz right now is one of the top 3 closers in baseball. And in that environment, when you are teammates with guys, they are open books, and you can talk to them, you can have conversations with them. There's a real opportunity for guys who want to learn to get something from these elite pitchers. And Robert said that's, as much as he's got Mexican pride on his father's side of the family, his mother's side of the family is German, his father's side is Mexican, as much as it's a part of who he is and he wants to represent Mexico, this opportunity to learn and maybe have some benefit that applies to the role he wants to win this year, I think there's additional benefit there. The same thing kind of applies for Alejandro Osuna, who is going to play in the outfield situation, or figure in the outfield situation for Mexico, which has Randy Arozarena on that team. And, again, it's another opportunity to really talk to some guys. There's young vets like Alec Thomas is on that team. Alec Thomas, I'm sorry. And you've got Arozarena. And so there's an opportunity for Osuna to represent his country, which he feels very strongly about. And he mentioned having been in the stands in 2017 when his brother Roberto pitched for Mexico. And the opportunity to say, I'm on a level with these elite players that represent my home country. And I think that just makes the opportunity to garner some experience and some learning really available to these guys.
So again, we'll be talking about how the spring training season is playing out here for the next few weeks. But let's move on now to our guest today. It's Doug Melvin, former general manager of the Rangers from 1994 to 2001, over a period in which Texas went to the playoffs for the first 3 times in franchise history. And we'll talk to Doug next. Well, our guest today on SportsDay Rangers is a familiar name to all Ranger fans, Doug Melvin, who was vice president and general manager of the Rangers from 1994 through 2001, then went on to be the general manager in Milwaukee 2002 to 2015, now a special senior advisor to the Brewers, Rangers winning their first 3 American League Western Division championships under Doug's reign. So, Doug, welcome to our podcast here this afternoon.
Great. Looking forward to it. It's been a while since I've seen the 2 of you.
So how are things going these days as senior advisor? Are you headed down to Arizona for spring training at all?
Well, tomorrow. I'm going to Antarctica tomorrow.
Antarctica?
Yeah, Antarctica tomorrow for about 18 days. And then I get back, and 1 day later when I get back, I go to Arizona for the last 2 weeks of spring training.
So you're not doing any scouting in Antarctica, right? This is a total
No,
vacation?
Just a bucket list, another thing to knock off the bucket list and that. But I don't do a lot. I go in there. The Brewers are nice enough to ask me to come to spring training, and I got to go up in May to do a function with CC Sabathia and a few things during the course of the year, but I don't get that involved with the baseball ops. They are all doing a great job there.
And you're the senior advisor to the junior senior advisor, Thad Levine, now, right?
Well, yeah, I meant to give Thad a call. I haven't talked to him. Gord Ash, my assistant that I had for years, said he was in the Dominican Republic recently. But yeah, I need to give a call to Thad. And they got Matt Klentek, was a former GM that was there, and he's working also in the Brewers system. But they're both younger than I am. They can keep working.
The senior advisor gig's not too bad. You get to do podcasts like me. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'm enjoying it. I still a baseball fanatic. I watch all the games, follow all the business, the craziness of the baseball world now, and how things have changed since 1994 to 2026. That's a long time ago, and it's gone by real fast, but things have changed, but I still follow the game and follow the Rangers too.
Doug, I think you can offer us a really distinct perspective, because I think fans often get the impression that you go to spring training as a GM and you're looking for this guy or that guy or this position battle or that position battle. And the longer I've covered this game, the longer it seems like that's not what a GM is really looking for. They're not looking at position battles. What is a GM looking at in spring training?
Well, you study your roster, put it together all in the off season. And I always tell people that, and the writers would come in and who's going to win this battle, what's the team looking like, and all that. But I always used to say there's going to be a couple players that's not even on the team right now that's going to help you win during the season. And Milwaukee was Niger Morgan was one. We traded for Niger Morgan with 3 days left in spring training, and he helped us. He came over from Washington. It was a minor deal, and he ended up being Tony Plush and helping us go on and win a division, go to the playoffs. It was a big plus for us. But I also remember back in Texas when Dean Palmer got hurt on the last exhibition game. I think he got it when he pulled the biceps tendon. And opening day, Craig Worthington made the ball club, and I think he hit a game-winning homer off Roger Clemens, or maybe it wasn't Clemens, but I think we won that ball game. And for example, those are the kind of things that can happen. So while we talk about all the players on the roster, I always felt as a gentleman, I wanted to know what the extended roster was going to look like. You pretty well know the 20 players. I'm sure Chris Young knows the 20 players on the team right now, maybe 23. I want to know from player 20 to player 40 that's going to help us over the course of the year. Now, today's game, it's to player 65, because the teams use a lot more players over the course of the year with roster changes and that. But that's what I always looked at, was that extended roster is the most important thing to give you depth, because that's where the season becomes heated up in the months of August and September.
So I want to talk a little bit about the first couple of years you're in Texas, and the first 6 months were obviously you were drinking from a fire hose, but you came in October '94, and they had already put in a new set of kind of regulations for that off season. You quickly traded Jose Canseco for Otis Nixon and Louis Ortiz, and then your first move. And then you traded for John Burkett, who ultimately we had to non-tender when the season started. But after that, the first thing in January you had to deal with was putting together a team of so-called replacement players during that strike. What was that like for a new GM for the ball club to have to quickly pivot to work, to do something that obviously had never been done before?
Yeah, well, it was my first time as a general manager, so I was really looking forward to the roster and getting to know the players, the coaching staff. And now I think the hardest part of doing that was for the manager and coaches, Johnny Oates, Dick Bosman. They were all Larry Hardy. They were all former players. And it had to be very difficult for them to go out there with replacement players and then go back once things were settled and deal with the players that they were going to have and build a trust with them too. So I felt bad for them as much as anything and that. But, putting together a replacement team was, you just ask your scout. And Omar Minaya was one of the big dogs for me at that time. And I remember Omar would be calling with sort of our hotline. We're just looking for anybody. And I'd say, Omar, did you find anybody today? He goes, yeah, I got a left fielder for us. And I forget the guy's name. He said, I got a left fielder for us. And I said, well, where'd you find him? He said, he's a bellhop at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in New York. And I said, well, does he play baseball? I said, yeah, I did 2 or 3 years ago. So Omar he was the best networker, great connections to people. And that helped us put that team together and that. And I thought we had a pretty good replacement team, but it was difficult in your first year. And that year, there was a lot of Gordash was first-time GM. Walt Jocketty was first time. I think Ed Lentz was first time. And myself, we all got hired. So it was tough for us, but I felt bad for the manager and coaches who had played and, were union members as players, and now they step into an uncomfortable situation.
Evan, we had a great team. We had the batting champions from like 5 different countries, like Italy and Mexico, and we touted it. We had all these batting champions, and we had the best record in the Grapefruit League. The problem is, as Doug can attest, the pitchers were pretty much gassed by the end of the spring training season. I don't know how we would have fielded a team much into the regular season.
They did get to play one game in Arlington, didn't they?
Yeah, our exhibition game against the Cubs. Got to play 2 games. Yep.
Yeah, we were in Miami. I was with the Marlins. I was covering the Marlins then, and we were in Miami. We were just to open the season on Sunday night, and they called the team off the field. The replacement players were practicing on the field, called them off the field while they were in the middle of their workout. And what's notable about this is maybe the best of the replacement players that ended up being in the big leagues, Kevin Millar, was on that roster. So he ended up having a long big league career, and now he's Mr. Baseball on the MLB Network. And the Rangers ended up with a replacement player. Who did Ron Mayhay pitch for during replacement ball? Do you know?
Boston.
Yeah. And he had a 10-year career in the big leagues. But the unfortunate part is both those guys, were considered scabs and never got the MLB pension because of it.
Well, later on, I had Damian Miller with the Brewers. And Damian was a popular player amongst teammates in that, but he ended up being in Arizona. I think they won the World Series when Damian Miller was catcher, and we signed him as a free agent. He was from La Crosse, Wisconsin at the end of his career. He played the last 2 years with us. Very popular. Craig Counsell, who's a big Union guy, and Damian were very close friends. But I remember at Scarborough Green in Texas, and I brought him up to pinch run in September. He could really run. And I had a couple of players come to me and mention that, did I know that he was a replacement player? And I did not know that. And I just said, no, I did not know, but I think he's got a chance to help us in a small way to continue winning ball games in September and that. And the other thing I felt like those kind of players, I think the replacement team, and I could be wrong, it's only my opinion, might have helped the players, that part of the union, because I think the owners recognized we can't play with replacement players. And so I think that in a roundabout way, I think those replacement players helped get the deal done between the union and the ownership in that. And I think and that's why I said about Scarborough Green, I wouldn't be too hard on him because, he was just trying to earn a living himself. But I do understand a little bit from the players' side, but I don't think Millar was an impact player. Damian Miller was impact, but I don't think it impacted what they got back from in their negotiations. And if you look at today's salary, obviously it didn't have any impact on their salaries now.
John just wants to jump in and say that Scarborough Green still holds a Ranger record.
6 stolen bases in one game. He still has that record.
Did he
It was
steal
the last day of the
third
season,
home?
right, in Seattle?
Yep, last day of the season in Seattle. So let me I'll let Evan go, but let's just look ahead. Let's get a little better news in 95. We come back to spring training, and you had started to put together, and this is the 30th anniversary in 2026 of that 96 team, but you had signed Mark McLemore. In spring training, you signed Mickey Tettleton, you signed Jeff Russell, you also added Bob Tewksbury, but you were starting, and you pretty much redid the pitching staff from that 94 club that you had started to sow the seeds for that 96 team, right? And started to put that nucleus together.
Right. And Bob Tewksbury and some of the guys, Tewksbury, there's somebody else. They were driving to Miami. What's the place south of Miami where they were at? Homestead?
Homestead.
Yeah, they were all in their cars driving, and I got a hold of a couple of them in their cars. And before they got to Homestead, they were able to come over to Port Charlotte and train with us, but they never even made Homestead, and they did it on a cheaper contract. It was, I think, at the time might have been $500,000, $700,000, but they didn't want to be left out in that. So they were good about it. And they came, and they all went on and had, extended careers beyond that. So how did I get John Burkett back? Did I get John back in the trade? No. Did he sign back?
Yes. We got Burkett back in 96, but we had to non-tender him to keep Kenny Rogers in '95 because of the rule changes.
Right. Tommy
And then the
Tanzer.
Marlins signed John Burkett and then traded John Burkett to the Rangers for Rick Helling.
And Vosper.
And then you traded to get Helling back the next year. What a circle of life that was.
Yeah. Well, they both helped us, Helling and but I remember after Burkett was traded and they were looking at our prospects. Helling had just thrown a no-hitter at Oklahoma City, or I think that's where it was. He threw a no-hitter in the minor leagues, and the Marlins saw that and they grabbed him. And I think Ed Vosberg. Oh, I traded Ed Vosberg to get Helling back. What it was, right? Yeah. So that was a good deal. Vosberg helped as a left-hander, but Helling came back and became a very good pitcher. And I signed Rick in Milwaukee too earlier on. So,
and that was a good deal. But I just want to ask before we let you go, Doug. I want to ask. Right. To me, you made the most effective trade in Rangers history. And I don't know that people know all the circumstances that were going into it at that point in time, but you did a great job in '98 at the trade deadline when you locked yourselves in a hotel room. But come 2000 and this team's not performing, and you got a real issue on the roster with Esteban Loaiza. And can you talk us through exactly what was going on with Loaiza and how it came that you ended up with Michael Young? I know you thinking I was going for Darwin Cubion at this point, but how did you end up with Michael Young in that deal?
Yeah, well, Gord Ash was the GM of Toronto, and later on, Gord comes to be my assistant for 15 years. But no, it's a good scouting story too. Rudy Terrasas, we sent Rudy out to see the Blue Jays AA club. I think it was in Knoxville at the time. And they had some depth in the infield, middle infield. They had Felipe Lopez. They had a player, Brent Abernath. He was a second baseman. And they had Michael Young. And we sent Rudy in to see them for a good 4 or 5 game series. And Felipe Lopez was probably the better prospect. Brett Abernath, he would have been today's analytical prospect. He hit home runs, left-handed hitting. Not a very big guy, but hit some home runs, great on-base percentage. But he was only a second baseman. Felipe played shortstop. And then Rudy says, I like this kid, Michael Young. He's athletic. He can play center field. He can play second. He can play short. He plays with a lot of energy. And so I had to make a decision. Do you sort of go with what people in the industry feel, that Felipe Lopez is the better guy? And we were just fortunate that Toronto had that depth. They could give up one of the players. And so we went with Michael Young. So he ended up, we made the deal with Michael Young and Darwin Cubion, and Esteban went over. And I think Esteban helped Toronto too in the last month or second month of the season. But that turned out to be one of people ask me, what are your best trades and whatever. CC Sabathia is the one that had the biggest impact in Milwaukee for it. Michael Young has got to be right there in the top 2, 3, 4 trades. And not only because he turned out to be a good player, but he's a great person too. And I wish I would have got to know him better, because later on I lost my job. And then we called Michael up, I think, for the last 2 games or something of the season in Seattle. It might have been
in Oakland. Yeah, in Oakland.
Yeah, he was up for the last week.
Might have been the year I got let go, I think. So I didn't get to meet him and have a relationship that I would have liked to have had with him and that. But I got him. He signed a baseball for me later on when we played the Rangers. I had him sign a baseball. I'm not a huge collector of things, but you make a trade that makes you feel good. I needed him to sign the ball, and I was so happy with the career he had. It was 2000 and maybe 380 hits later, and that. So I got to tell you a little story. You got a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
So I got to tell you. So remember the deal we made with Cordero, and we put Nelson Cruz in the trade. So I get a little bit crucified on that one at times in that trade. And we put Nelson Cruz in, and they later on, people said, how'd you give up Nelson Cruz? Well, we had Ryan Braun in left field, and we had Corey Hart in right field. And at the time, we didn't have the DH. And Nelson was probably a good right fielder. We looked at him, we said, he's a little bit older. He's 25 or 26. And so we said, well, we could probably live without him because we're covered in the outfield. We had depth there. Corey Hart was younger. Braun was younger than Nelson, and Nelson hadn't played in the big leagues yet. So Nelson went on to have the career he did. And then later on, we're playing. Nelson was, I'm trying to think what team he was with. But they came into Milwaukee, and I'm standing there, and he taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and he said, "Oh, it's been a long time since I've seen you." I said, "Yeah, only 450 homers later." and that's you'd hit 450 homers from the last time I saw him in that. But yeah, that's one I look back on and say, because, you know, if you're going to be talking about your good deals, you got to be talking about a deal you have a little regret. But Cordero helped us for the 2 years, but we lost him in free agency. Kevin Mensch came over and was good for a short time and that. But if we would have, I don't think we had the DH yet at that time. And I think if we might have had the DH, he considered it. And he might have considered keeping him. He was a good outfielder with arm strength, but we just had depth, and he was a little older AAA player than the guys we had in the big leagues.
And look, what doesn't get said often enough about this whole deal is that, look, the Rangers at one point in time kind of gave up on Nelson Cruz as well. They DFA'd him, ran him through waivers. He went unclaimed, went back, was outrighted to the minor leagues. And it was only when he was really about, I guess, 28 that he really came back up and started really. He was the classic late bloomer.
If I made a mistake in that deal, the mistake was not claiming him on waivers.
Yeah.
Right? When they put him on waivers, that was a mistake that the idiot Doug, why didn't you claim him and get him back?
Yeah.
And so, but again, he was a little bit older, and I think that's why people stayed away.
Well, I think your track record over 20, what was it, almost 25 years as a general manager certainly had a lot more hits than you did misses.
I got this for 20 years as a GM, like Major League Baseball. So it sits here next to me. I better not drop it. But anyways, yeah. So I got that for 20 years of baseball. I was happy that I was very fortunate to only work with 2 organizations in 20 years as a GM. Today, it doesn't happen very often.
Well, that 96 team here in Texas, we're celebrating it this year. We're having an event in August. Hopefully you can come down with the players and the coaches that were on that team. It's a team that's remembered fondly here, and we appreciate your time today. We don't want to take any more of your time, and we know you got to go to Antarctica. So have a great trip, and I hopefully will see you this season.
I'm going to start walking like a penguin. But
I knew there had to be a penguin reference in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate it, Doug.
If I get invited, I'll come in August.
Okay. Well, you'll get invited. Don't worry.
Okay.
Well, on the archives in Arlington here in February and this spring, we're going to look back at the Rangers' spring training homes. And obviously you start at the beginning, and that was beautiful Municipal Stadium in Pompano Beach, Florida. Evan, it's an area you're very familiar with. You worked in that area. Did you spend much time at beautiful Municipal Stadium?
So, you know, I as a kid, I lived for 5 years in South Florida in the late 70s. And in Fort Lauderdale, Pompano Beach is Broward County, and as was Fort Lauderdale. And so my dad would occasionally take me to a spring training game at one of the local stadiums. And there were a lot of stadiums in South Florida at that point in time. But my little league team went one year to go watch a minor league game, a Class A team in the Florida State League that was playing there. This was 78 or 79, I guess. And the stands in the stadium, which basically were wooden bleachers, were falling apart at that point in time. And so the idea that the Rangers still trained there for another 8 years after that just always blows my mind. And to hear you guys talk about what it was like there on the field is one thing. The other thing is that it was a different era in terms of socializing and all of that after games. But John, what stood out about the functionality of Pompano Beach and what took place there?
Not much. Pompano Beach was a high school stadium. We didn't even really announce a capacity for the place. My guess is it would be under 1,000. We never came close to selling it out. Except for we played the Yankees, who were basically 10 minutes away at Fort Lauderdale Stadium, which we thought was like a palace compared to Municipal Stadium. And stadium, again, a very loose phrase there. There were two fields, and again, taking people back to what spring training was then and now it's not even close. But we practiced in the main stadium. We had one other field that I would call like a military battleground. It had like this grass that was 10 feet high, basically. The high school team in Pompano Beach took batting practice there. We were the second tenant in that field, if you believe it or not.
Pompano Beach Tornadoes, I might add. The Pompano Beach Tornadoes.
So we had the two fields. The wind blew straight in. If you remember, there was an airport on the center field fence, small private airport, where the Goodyear blimp parked, so we could see the Goodyear blimp. There was no tarp in this stadium, so there was one day it rained for 5 minutes, and we had to postpone the game because the field, it was like a downpour for 5 minutes. And all the grounds crew could do is bail out the field, and they couldn't get it done, so we had to cancel the game. 40 years ago was Bobby Valentine's first spring training as Rangers manager in Pompano Beach. And Bobby thought he was going to make this work. We did 2-a-day workouts so he could utilize more of the field. He personally built a batting cage, outdoor batting cage, hung up the netting and everything. The next day he came back, and someone had come in overnight and stolen all the netting. So Bobby was not happy. The dressing rooms were like a high school locker room. The weight room was down the left field line, if you want to call it a weight room. And Charlie Huff, after he would be down there working out during a game, he would wheel the bike out so you could see him down the left field line. And Charlie had a heater in his mouth, and he's doing the bike exercise. Everybody could watch him during the game. The press box was a high school press box with with plexiglass over the windows, except in the radio booth. So the only people that sat up there were me and the PA announcer. The writers sat down the right field line on a picnic table. So 1986 was the last year. As I said, we did 2-a-day workouts. We had a total of 54 players in camp that year, Evan. And the other thing you got to remember is our minor league complex, if you want to call it that, was in Plant City, Florida. 3.5 hours from Pompano Beach. There were no minor league jicks. If there were you'd make your cuts, you'd put guys in a taxi and take them 3.5 hours north, and you never would see them again. Because our so-called minor league complex. The game started on March 8th of that year. I mean, spring training ran later because opening day was later. We had 8 total coaches, the 6 major league coaches and 2 minor league coaches. And just by comparison, 1981, they only brought 46 players total to big league camp. So the regulars played all the time. Pitchers threw 5 innings. But in 1986, that team, it really kind of came together in spring training. We've talked about Pete Incaviglia before. On February 26, 1986, everybody knows the story. He's coming straight out of college at Oklahoma State, hadn't played in the minors, and Bobby Valentine's pitching batting practice, and Inky hits a line drive that goes through the left field wall. Again, the left field wall was rotted.
Let's not call it a wall. It was a fence. It was a wooden
fence. And the ball goes right through the wall, and it was hitting in a 20-mile-an-hour wind, we said at the time. Now, if you tell the story, it was a gale force coming in. But we kept that hole in the fence all spring to just show what Incaviglia could do. He makes the team, hits 30 home runs. It's the same spring, and I looked this up the other day, that Charlie Huff had one of the more unusual injuries that I've ever seen. Now, Charlie had won, he was the ace of the staff. And on March 24th, which was about 10 days before opening day, and we were still in Pompano, Charlie broke the little finger on his pitching hand, his right hand, when he tries to shake hands like this with somebody out at dinner, let's say. So he breaks his finger. They have to put 2 pins in. He misses the first month of the season, still wins 17 games. So Pompano, and that was the spring. Edwin Correa, Bobby Witt, Mitch Williams, and Ruben Sierra, all very, Correa was 19, Ruben was 19, and that team went on and won 87 games. And you know, Evan, Pompano Beach was in a great area. All you had to do was go over this little causeway, and you were on the beach. And you mentioned the social aspect of it. Players, staff, everybody stayed at the Holiday Inn right on the beach. And there was a bar called the Laughing Fish. And, you would all congregate in there before you went to dinner or after you went to dinner. I remember I was in there the night Georgetown, this was 1985, Georgetown lost to Villanova. I had done their basketball games for the previous 7 or 8 years, and they lost to Villanova in the NCAA championship game, and players are sitting there giving me grief and everything, it was just a different era. It was a great time. So and the next spring we moved to Port Charlotte, which we'll talk about in a later podcast, which at the time was a great complex. Later on, it certainly wasn't. But in 1987, there's plenty of stories
to be shared about Port Charlotte too from my time there. But yeah, I think that the South Florida scene, which I got to experience from 75 to 80, and then again in the 90s as a baseball writer, it was just different. It was a different era, and every little town had its little signature watering hole. The Braves, Bobby Cox and everybody would go out to Monero's Steakhouse and eat in West Palm Beach. The media dining room in West Palm Beach was a broom closet, and they basically put some tuna salad in there.
And when we went to West Palm, we loved it because our media dining room was like this little closet in the back of the clubhouse, and we had these big cans of tomato soup, and we became known. It was called Captain Jack's, and we served tomato soup and hot dogs. That was our spring training lunch.
But I'll just end it with this. You mentioned the Yankees. And obviously, Fort Lauderdale Yankee Stadium was central. It also was backed up to an airport, executive airport in Fort Lauderdale. But in the spring of 1977, my dad took me to a Yankees spring training game. And I was 12, almost 12, and went there with a beat-up old baseball, and was standing near the dugout when Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford came over, and there were a bunch of New York kids down there, and I stuck my little ball out there too, and got an autographed ball by both Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford, and it's the one baseball that I've kept since I was 11 years old. It sits on my right above my desk in my office, and it was a great time to be a kid in those situations, because there weren't all the collectible hounds, and there weren't all of those other things. And you could meet a player and actually get an autograph and feel like you really did have an interaction with the player.
Yeah. And Pompano Beach again was what it was. It was kind of embarrassing. I mean, in terms of that, with other clubs, even back in the day. And when I was with the Orioles, we were at Miami Stadium, which I'm sure you've been to, which was 10,000 seats, but it was also falling down. But, you always did feel like you were at a high school stadium when you were training in Pompano Beach. But for that 86 club, it didn't matter. We won 87 games in that facility. So anyway, that's this week's SportsDay Rangers podcast.
We'll be back next week with more. Not sure. We haven't had our big meeting on who we're going to have as our guest next week, John, but we'll come up with somebody. We'll have lots of questions for them. Maybe we'll get one of the many former Rangers involved in the World Baseball Classic management of teams. But until then, you know where you can follow us on socials. I'm at Evan_P_Grant. And John, where are you?
I'm at Ranger Blake, and follow Evan and Sean and the columnists from the morning news. Their coverage out in spring training here over the next few weeks. They do a great job, and we'll talk to you soon.